BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're continuing with our Zodiac Killer book discussion on Robert Graysmith and Zodiac Unmasked. You'll see that this is part of a multi-part series, but if you're just jumping in right now, I think this is an excellent time, because I would love to hear your responses to these challenge questions. However, if you haven't heard the first segments, parts 1 and 2, of our book discussion on Zodiac Unmasked, I hope you'll listen to those at some point. But please keep listening now, because in this part of the book, they explore some very bold claims. Graysmith, as well as the people that he's writing about, that is. The first one that I'd like to talk about is, I was just reading some stuff in the chapters that was saying that they asked the question, did the Zodiac have animosity toward women? Did the Zodiac have a deep hatred of women? And is that something that has been carried out in the Zodiac mystery? Some of the evidence that they provide for this is that they believe, by that we're just talking about investigators and people Robert Graysmith is making notes of, that the Zodiac put more effort into killing the female victims than he did the male victims. The biggest point to support that is, every time the Zodiac attacked a woman, the woman passed away, but the men did not always pass away. For example, Lake Herman Road. Betty Lou Jensen was murdered. David Faraday was also murdered in that one. But Blue Rock Springs, Darlene Ferrin was murdered. Mike Mageau survived. Lake Berryessa, Cecilia Shepard was murdered, but Brian Hartnell survived. But then once you get to the Paul Stein killing in Presidio Heights, Paul Stein was the only victim. To the best of our knowledge, there wasn't any woman present at all. What would be the response to that? And, I mean, in that instance, yes, no women were involved at all. And I don't have the person's name in front of me, but someone left a comment on a previous Zodiac Killer upload that we did on this channel to discuss this, and I would give you a shout out if I had your name in front of me, but thank you for the comment all the same. They said something to the effect of, it's inappropriate to say that the Zodiac had this deep animosity toward women because there were more male victims than female victims. And think about what we just said. We had David Faraday, Mike Mageau, Brian Hartnell, and Paul Stein. I mean, we're of course counting some of the people that survived the Zodiac attacks. The Zodiac attacked more men than he did women, and of course we're excluding Cheri Jo Bates and Kathleen Johns for the purpose of this discussion, but they will come up later. So, the thing to say about that is that I think that a lot of people are really getting caught up with this, and I mean, it's good to have a greater understanding of how events took place, but on the one hand, I think that a lot of the evidence to say that the Zodiac really just hated women is a little bit flimsy, but maybe there is some truth to that. For example, one thing that was discussed a little bit more heavily was, at the Lake Berryessa stabbing, September 27th of 1969, Brian Hartnell was stabbed 7 times, but Cecilia Shepard was stabbed 10 times. And if you ask Gareth Penn, that is such a hard thing to say. If you ask Gareth Penn, he would just say that was a mathematical signature meant to put 10 plus 7 is 17, and times 17 is one of the magic numbers in Gareth Penn's mathematical theory about how all of this stuff is linked together. So there was a very specific reason for that. But I do confess, in that specific instance, if we're going to use those numbers, there are a variety of sources on the internet that have like this, how many times each victim was stabbed, but I think the more precise one that is more well accepted is that Brian Hartnell was stabbed 7 times and Cecilia Shepard was stabbed 10 times. So that would indicate that more effort was put into killing the female victim. I'm not 100% convinced, because it's like, that is just conjecture or surmise or just a possibility. I don't necessarily know what was going through that person's head, what he was thinking about when he was stabbing each victim at the Lake Berryessa stabbing. A lot of it is guesswork, for lack of a better term. What else can we say in these parts of the book that we were just going through is that one of the possibilities about why the Zodiac Killer was created was to restore someone's fractured ego. And Robert Graysmith, at this point in the book, actually writes some very praiseworthy things about Arthur Lee Allen, talking about how Arthur Lee Allen prior to 1967 was not such a bad guy on the surface. I repeat, on the surface. No, we know that he was a very accomplished swimmer and diver. He was someone who gained an enormous amount of weight after 1967. We're talking about maybe 50 or 60 pounds. And of course, his physical appearance changed. He was very passionate about his dog and pet skunk. I didn't think that I was going to be reading that sentence anytime soon, but okay, Lee Allen, if that floats your boat, I guess you can have a pet skunk. But they did note, though, that the skunk had not been desensitized or something or desensitified, which apparently that's something you can do to skunks so they make them that they don't smell. That's some new territory for me. I never had a pet skunk, never thought twice about it, to be honest. But Arthur Lee Allen was somebody who really went down. His life began to sort of fall apart. And this has been talked before, and even in the Lyndon Lafferty theory talking about William Joseph Grant, he says that the reason why the Zodiac Killer was created was to restore someone's fractured ego. But there's a rather similar discussion that is happening here in Zodiac Unmasked. Now, that brings us to another point. Arthur Lee Allen was an alleged pedophile. That's not a controversial statement, and they do talk about this in the book here. One of the things, though, that Sharon Hagen, the profiler, says that actually eliminates somebody like Arthur Lee Allen from being a Zodiac Killer suspect is the Zodiac was not a pedophile, to the best of our knowledge. And they also say, though, that Arthur Lee Allen had a very specific attention to younger girls, actually. And I believe in the earlier parts of Zodiac Unmasked, they said at one point he was even a custodian at an elementary school. Sounds absolutely disgusting, to be honest. Arthur Lee Allen sounds like a scumbag. But all that aside, what Sharon Hagen, I believe, was trying to say is that there is not precise evidence that the Zodiac Killer had any pedophile tendencies. I mean, I'm really not 100% sure, and whenever I talk about her on the channel, I almost always get a comment coming in saying, psychological profiling is not exact, it is not 100% precise, they can be overlooking some things. And, I mean, that definitely is true. But if you do look at some things about the Zodiac mystery, at the end of the section that I was just reading, they're trying to connect Arthur Lee Allen to the Riverside killing of 1966, the murder of Cheri Jo Bates on October 30th of that year. That was a very vicious killing, stabbed way more than 7 times or 10 times. She was also slashed across the face in a fight with the attacker. Now, what do we make of that? Because a lot of the other attacks in the Zodiac, confirmed incidents, well, in fact, all of them, I would say, the Zodiac attacked people who were in a vulnerable place and they had no possibility to fight back. Even the Lake Berryessa stabbing, where the victims were tied up and stabbed, they did not have an honest possibility. They didn't have a fair chance of fighting back, more or less. The Cheri Jo Bates murder in Riverside was very vicious. She's pulling out chunks of his hair, snaps his Timex watch. I mean, that was something that was very physical. And that's why a lot of people genuinely believe that the Zodiac Killer did not murder Cheri Jo Bates, and instead, that was a revenge killing by someone who had known her personally, perhaps someone who felt rejected by her, an ex-lover. But the other side of the coin is that some people believe that Cheri Jo Bates was murdered by the Zodiac, and that the reason why that incident was so rough and all of those extra details about it, and pulling out the hair, slashing her across the face, the reason why all of that sloppiness happened is because the Zodiac was someone who was learning how to kill people at that point. And, I mean, that's something that I think has been fairly widely discussed about why there are all those differences. And by the time you get to 1968, more than 2 years later, the Zodiac is just like making a clean, flawless getaway, fires some bullets at the teenagers at Lake Herman Road, gets into a car, and drives away. So, I mean, I don't personally believe that Cheri Jo Bates was a genuine Zodiac murder for a variety of reasons. And I mean, we kind of just laid out the pros and cons, and I think I'm definitely more on the side of the cons. I mean, the police even supposedly tried to make an arrest in the Cheri Jo Bates case at the late 90s, but they pulled out for some reason. I would have to go back and refresh some of that material. And when it comes to refreshing, we did an upload recently on Robert Emmett. Because if you look at the Zodiac 408 cipher, there's a bottom line. The final line of the cipher is just this mash of letters that people aren't even 100% sure what it means. One possibility is that it could say Robert Emmett the hippie. And in this part of Zodiac Unmasked that we were just reading, it says that Arthur Lee Allen's swim coach and diving coach was named Robert Emmett. And that was something that I didn't even include in that upload. We did talk about a few people though, like Robert Emmett Rotifer, as well as other possibilities that this could be a tie to Robert Emmett in Golden Gate Park. Robert Emmett Rotifer was somebody that was stationed in Germany for a while with the military, but just another possible alternative thing that's going on. I highly recommend that you check out our upload, Zodiac Killer Robert Emmett, and we can hear more about those things. But what Graysmith is trying to say is that, not simply that he is trying to say anything, he is saying that that was the name of Arthur Lee Allen's diving coach. But the big thing that we did point out in our Robert Emmett upload is the Robert Emmett that you get from the cipher is not spelled the same way, and I believe Robert is even misspelled up. I think it comes out as Robet, R-O-B-E-T, and then Emmett is spelled E-M-E-T, which the Robert Emmett that he's writing about in the book did not spell his name that way. So that's something else that's going on. Just wanted to mention that very briefly. So what we can see is with some of the things surrounding Arthur Lee Allen's life, I think, though, that Graysmith is trying to paint the picture that this guy was someone who used to be in somewhat of a good place. I mean, he had a little bit of prosperity, or he had some good things, and then his life slowly started to kind of crumble and get out of control, and then he became a destructive individual. What they also really want to say is something that I kind of mentioned last time a little bit, when they're talking about the possibility of Arthur Lee Allen being a schizophrenic. I don't believe that they genuinely thought that. I think what they really just wanted to say was that he was a very pathological liar, and he could lie very pathologically to the point where maybe he would genuinely believe it himself. It really depends on what you want to talk about. We don't want to say chronic liar versus a pathological liar. But at this point, I would really just like to kind of redo the challenge questions and just put them out one by one. Number 1, do you believe that the Zodiac Killer had any animosity toward women, or is it what that other person said, the commenter, that no, the Zodiac attacked more male victims than female, therefore the Zodiac really doesn't seem to show an enormous amount of animosity toward women? That would be number 1. Number 2, do you believe that the Zodiac Killer was trying to restore a fractured ego, and that was part of the creation of the Zodiac Killer myth? Even in the Thomas Henry Horn Zodiac Killer hoax theory, he goes down the pathway by saying that Hal Snook, his suspect for writing the letters, was very bitter about not getting his military medals from World War II on the days that he should have received them, and he came back to America and tried to get them, to get the hard pieces, like to actually get the physical medals, and they were like, we have no record of you ever obtaining these. And Thomas Henry Horn claims that 25 years to the day of when Hal Snook should have received his medals is when each of the Zodiac letters have been mailed. Although, I do confess, I didn't go back through the records to fact check them. We always have to sort of have this, air of skepticism and curiosity, if you will. So we also had something mentioned about both of these points in the Earl Van Best book. I just want to throw this out there because it's also included in Gary Stewart's discussions about Earl Van Best. Gary Stewart, of course, wrote the book with The Most Dangerous Animal of All with Susan Mustafa, his co-writer, and they say that the men in the Zodiac mystery meant nothing. like the male victims, they were just in way of the female victims. Gary Stewart wrote that very clearly. And, I mean, whether or not you think Earl Van Best was the Zodiac killer or not, that's almost beside the point for the purpose of this discussion. What he is simply saying is, number one, the Zodiac was mad that he didn't get to be with the woman that he wanted to be with. So animosity toward women, jealous, rejected lover, if you will. And that leads to the second point about restoring the fractured ego. That's what I said, though, when I said that this is something that has been mentioned by a variety of different people. But of course, in the Zodiac hoax theory, it simply states that Robert Graysmith, using his books Zodiac from 1986 and Zodiac Unmasked, which we're currently discussing now, was the person who would have influenced people like Lyndon Lafferty, as well as somebody like Gary Stewart, and perhaps even Philip Powers, the guy who was promoting the angle that his grandfather was the Zodiac killer. So it's like people are just taking Robert Graysmith's narrative and recycling them. But I would be very curious what you think about these challenge questions. And the only other thing that I could think to ask as an additional challenge question is, do you believe that the Zodiac was dealing with any type of specific mental illness? I mean, we talked about how they mentioned schizophrenia, and even not a mental illness, but more of a mental condition, being a pathological liar. So what I can say about this is that I don't believe that the Zodiac was a schizophrenic unless he was highly, highly medicated, based on how cold, methodical, and calculating all of these things seem. But what I would say is that we should be very keen to note the manner in which these murders were taking place at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, as well as the Paul Stein incident. It really seems like some people are in a vulnerable place, and someone comes up and fires some bullets. The Zodiac wrote in one of the letters that the teenagers were sprayed with bullets, but in the Paul Stein murder, I believe it was only a single shot that killed him from the back of the taxi cab. So, not really giving any motive, I misspoke. Not giving any opportunity for the victim to retaliate or fight back. And with Lake Berryessa, it's not too different. The victims were put in an immobile place. I do have to insist, though, it is very abnormal for serial killers to do that, to deviate from the pattern to that extent, where they have, where they start tying a victim up and stabbing them. That is something that just people are still curious about to this day. I'm still curious about that to this day, about what that could mean. And people have brought up a few possibilities with that. That number one, Lake Berryessa could have been a copycat, and that somebody had learned about the symbol from the newspaper. The Zodiac symbol was published August 4th, 1969 in the Vallejo Times-Herald. Or simply just that, was this something to the contrary? That the Zodiac was growing in confidence and then wanted to try to commit the murders in a different way? If we're going to say that thing about Cheri Jo Bates, what if the Zodiac learned more and improved upon his destructive tendencies, because these were not sexually based motivated killings? This was the mind of somebody who was trying to become the Zoion, the animal, Zodiac, the most dangerous animal of all. And what Graysmith would like to remind us, as always, is Arthur Lee Allen was enamored with the most dangerous animal of all. And I think that's where we're going to have to leave it at now. I would love to hear your responses to the challenge questions. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. And I hope you will check out some of the other Zodiac uploads that we did on Robert Emmett, as well as Kenneth Lester German. And if you haven't heard parts 1 and 2, you can always go back and listen to them. That's all for me now. Until next time.